Coming this fall from SJS Direct, Easting the Sands of Time. It's action, adventure, and romance in ancient Egypt in this fantasy flashback Easting series adventure. Pre-order Easting the Sands of Time today on Amazon.com. Recently, Diversity in Comics, aka Richard C. Meyer, filed a civil lawsuit against comic book writing icon Mark Waid for tortious interference as related to his book Jawbreakers Lost Souls, and is seeking damages as related to lost revenue. Now, Richard C. Meyer is justified in seeking these damages against your Mark Waid because your Mark Waid used his considerable influence in the comic book industry to prevent Richard C. Meyer from being able to get a deal with Antarctic Press towards getting Jawbreakers Lost Souls published with Antarctic Press and reaching the larger marketplace of the comic book industry. Now, Jawbreakers Lost Souls was a project that was crowdfunded by Richard C. Meyer and John Malin, and it was crowdfunded by them because they wanted to try to get their comic book into the marketplace. And after the success of Jawbreakers Lost Souls at the time, which was over $100,000, Antarctic Press wanted to capitalize on that success by publishing this book and getting it distributed to comic book stores. However, because your Mark Waid had an issue with Richard C. Meyer's political and personal beliefs, he decided to go out and use his influence to prevent Richard C. Meyer from reaching the marketplace of the comic book industry. And he did this with tweets on social media that were screenshotted by many people, and he also did it through phone calls to Antarctic Press's publisher. And these calls, which were harassing and intimidating, were the reason why the publisher of Antarctic Press decided to cave in and decided not to publish Richard C. Meyer and John Malin's Jawbreakers Lost Souls. And he did this, again, all due to Mark Waid's considerable influence in the comic book industry. And these threats were the reason why this book wasn't allowed to reach the marketplace. And when your Mark Waid participated in these behaviors, what he didn't know he was doing was, one, violating our First Amendment as related to freedom of the press, and two, he violated federal antitrust laws because you cannot use your influence to prevent a competitor from reaching the marketplace with a competing product. Because when you do that, you are costing that competitor money. And this publishing deal that was contracted by Richard C. Meyer and Antarctic Press, this was going to make both Meyer, John Malin, and Antarctic Press a considerable sum of money. But your Mark Waid was not concerned with the profits as related to business. He was more concerned about his personal feelings. Now, people call your Mark Waid King Baby because he's so emotional. And if you're going to be emotional, you have to understand there are consequences to your actions. And this is why I can stand with Richard C. Meyer, because I understand that when you participate in actions, there has to be a response to them that lets people know they cannot participate in these actions that violate people's civil rights and their rights to compete in the business marketplace. And because this is what this is all about as related to Mark Waid. Your Mark Waid believes that he is going to be the gatekeeper over the comic book industry. He believes he is going to control what type of books get published, and he believes that books have to meet his standard. And I have to say this to your Mark Waid. Who made you the king over the comic book industry? Because The last time I checked our United States Constitution, it clearly stated that we have freedom of the press, and no individual can abridge freedom of the press. Moreover, no individual can prevent a product from reaching a marketplace in a capitalist economy, because in a capitalist economy, you are supposed to be able to compete, and it's that competition that gives people the incentive to go out here and create better products. And your Richard C. Meyer, who was challenged by many social justice warriors, was challenged to say if he could make a better comic, then do so. But when your Richard C. Meyer goes out of his way to make said better product, your social justice warriors like Mark Waid want to prevent him from coming to the marketplace. And again, there are consequences for participating in these kind of behaviors, and that's what this lawsuit is all about, making sure that people who participate in behaviors that violate people's rights understand that there is a punitive action that will be taken by the courts for those types of people who go out here and try to interfere with things like freedom of the press and freedom of the business marketplace. Because in our United States, these are principal foundations as related to our country's business and related to the rights our founding fathers wanted to give every American citizen. Now, your Mark Waid, in his feelings, wasn't thinking about the business of the comic book industry, because books like Jawbreaker's Lost Souls are the types of books that the industry desperately needs. Your Richard C. Meyer's Jawbreaker's Lost Souls, at the time when your Mark Waid went out here and scuttled that publishing deal, was on its way to getting over 9,000 sales on the Indiegogo he had raised funds for. So that 9,000 sales, that's a huge number in a comic book industry where you have books that are 30,000 ordered, as for top tier books like Spider-Man, Superman, and even some Batman books. And the 9,000 guaranteed sales is a big number. And as a publishing professional, I can tell you, for a independent self-published project to get 9,000 sales, that's something even trade publishers would take a serious look at, because it shows a trade publisher that this book has an audience and that the people who are writing these books have a following. So a trade publisher, they would go out of their way to make a deal, and a publisher like Antarctic Press was smart to actually make that deal on that book, because again, this is not just about selling Jawbreaker's Lost Souls, it was also about building and establishing Richard C. Meyer as a brand. Because if you can sell 9,000 books, then you're going to start building a following, because people are going to start anticipating the second book and the third book. So your Mark Waid really did serious damage to Richard C. Meyer, not only as related to his publishing, but he also did damage to his brand. And he needs to be punished for that, because in the world of trade publishing, it works like this. Again, 9,000 sales for an indie book that is just done through crowdfunding on a small budget, that's something every publisher who is smart is going to take a serious look at. I know if I had SJS Direct in a much better place right now, I would have been contacting Richard C. Meyer and trying to work out a deal to get that book in other marketplaces like the comic book stores and even possibly Amazon.com, where you can really start pulling some serious bank, because on the online side of the business, this is where you can really pull some money, because you're not only getting those American sales, but you're also getting the international sales, and you are able to pull the digital sales. So there were numerous places that Meyer and Malin could have reached a bigger audience, as related to publishing. And again, your Mark Waid got in the way. And what was really sad about this whole situation is that your Mark Waid bullied and intimidated a publisher. And as related to our United States Constitution, that's what was really troubling about your Mark Waid. Because, again, you would think a comic book writer would understand the value of our U.S. Constitution and freedom of the press, and would not be trying to censor people regarding freedom of the press. Because just like he tried to censor Richard C. Meyer, somebody could try to censor him, all because they had a different opinion. And that's something, again, our First Amendment was meant to protect ourselves from. And the fact that he could go out here and bully and intimidate a publisher, again, is quite troubling, because no one should be able to intimidate a publisher because a writer is someone who has different political views or a different political opinion. This is where I had the issue with Antarctic Press caving in, because as a publisher, you have to stand for the First Amendment, because the First Amendment is one of the most important amendments of our Constitution. Because when it relates to the First Amendment, it's not just about protecting the speech you like, it's really about protecting the speech you don't like. And when someone disagrees with someone, it's important for us to protect their free speech rights, because we need to hear their counterpoint. And when as relates to diversity in comics, he just wanted to present his type of comic book to the marketplace, and whether you agree or disagree with him, he should have had that right to be able to publish Jawbreaker's Lost Souls with Antarctic Press. But sadly, because Antarctic Press didn't stand by him the way a publisher should, this is what happened with Mark Waid. And this, again, it shows that your Mark Waid was more about feelings than about our Constitution, and he was more about feelings than even the state of our comic book industry. Because our comic book industry, again, is in very dire straits, and as related to bigger publishing companies like Marvel barely pulling $40,000 on a A-list book like Spider-Man, and DC Comics barely pulling $40,000 to $50,000 on books like Superman, we're in dire straits as compared to the comic book industry over 30 years ago, when those same books were pulling, at least with Spider-Man's case, was at least, I think, about $250,000 to $300,000 or $400,000, and Superman was pulling at least $250,000 to $300,000 copies an issue. And books like X-Men were selling 500,000 comic books every month. So comics have really fallen really hard, and this is why books like Jawbreaker's Lost Souls are extremely important, because Richard C. Meyer had actual sales of 9,000, not orders of 20,000 like many Marvel and DC comics have. And then comic shops have to just try to eat the cost as related to those false numbers, but as related to sales, he had actual sales. And this is what really upsets many of these SJW comic pros, is that Richard C. Meyer actually has sales, he actually has an audience, and that his audience is actually bigger than these far leftists who want to try to take over the comic book industry and turn it into a socialist platform where they can push their identity politics and push their propaganda in the pages of comic books. And that's something I have an issue with, because as a longtime comic fan and someone who wants to work in the comic book industry, I want the comic book industry to remain an open marketplace related to business. And I want there to be a business platform where creators can be able to write and publish whatever they please, and then the customer will decide what sells based on the content in between the pages of that comic, not based on the political views of the creator. Because when we look at that approach to business, it's a complete failure, because many of these leftists, they want to be able to publish their far left propaganda, their feminist propaganda, and they want to be able to use the comic book industry as a platform for this, and they don't want any competition, because if there is business competition, it would show how these comics just can't sell and how poorly they perform. Because as a longtime comic fan, I've seen the types of far leftist comics that were produced back in the 1980s. And what happened in the 1980s during the black and white craze was the marketplace quickly sorted out the poor quality independent published comics, because those comics quickly went out of print because the publishers could not sustain them due to the poor sales. Because in the early days of the black and white independent comic craze, we had all these books like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Yes, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were a hit, but many other types of black and white indie books, they all fell by the wayside due to poor sales. And during the webcomics craze of the late 2000s, we saw many webcomics come and webcomics go, and the ones that survived, like Something Positive by R.K. Milholland and many other strips, survived because the creators made content that the audience liked. So I look at the overall comic book industry, and I look at Mark Waid's behavior, and Mark Waid's behavior was completely egregious as related to Richard C. Meyer. And the reason why his behavior was completely egregious was because in a time when the industry was in dire straits, he did not think about the needs of his fellow comic pros. He did not think about his fellow publishers, nor did he think about his fellow industry. All he thought about were his feelings as related to Richard C. Meyer, and because he was so caught up in his feelings, he didn't think about the big picture as related to the industry. The industry desperately needs books to be hits, because it's the books that are hits, like Jawbreaker's Lost Souls, that drive foot traffic into comic shops, and it's that foot traffic that enables comic shops to be able to sell not only new comic books, but old comic books, action figures, video games, and manga, and also other collectibles. Because as a guy who's been in the collectibles business for over 20 years, I know that comic book stores, they need product to drive traffic, and when you have a product with good word of mouth, that's what you want coming to the marketplace. But Mark Waid didn't want this Jawbreaker's Lost Souls on the marketplace because he didn't agree with Richard C. Meyer's political and personal views. And again, that really hurt the overall industry, and it hurt the business of all these comic shops out here, again, who desperately need product to be able to draw customers. So this lawsuit, I believe that Richard C. Meyer is going to win, and I believe he's going to win based on all the evidence that your Mark Waid left, because your Mark Waid left a paper trail that is just too obvious for any judge to see tortious interference, because we clearly have all the tweets he left on Twitter screenshotted. We have him making statements about this in numerous interviews with different websites like Bleeding Cool, and we have evidence of him making numerous statements. And again, even though he has deleted his Twitter and Facebook, there are screenshots of these events. There were witnesses all across the country who saw this action, and there were people who saw him participating in this behavior online. So this is an open and shut case as related to this civil lawsuit, and I'm hoping that when Richard C. Meyer wins, that it sends a message to many on the far left, many of the SJW comic creators, that there is a line of demarcation in the sand, and that there are rules and protocols that they have to follow. Because, as related to our United States Constitution, everyone is guaranteed freedom of the press, and that freedom of speech, as related to freedom of the press, is meant to protect the speech you disagree with. And just because you disagree with someone's ability to publish something does not mean you can prevent them from reaching the marketplace with their product. And that's a boundary I believe that needs to be enforced, because as related to many of what they call SJW comic pros, they believe that they can turn the comic book industry into a fiefdom, because they want to say that comics are a hobby or something like that, but the comic book industry is a business, because an industry is about creating products to reach customers, and you want to reach customers because you want to make a profit. Because when I go out here and I publish SJS Direct books, I don't only publish them because I like telling stories. I'm publishing books because I want to reach an audience of readers. And I don't go out of my way to go raise funds to pay artists to pay for covers to just make them for my own vanity. No, I make those books because I want to reach readers all over the world and show them that there are African American characters who are in genres like fantasy, science fiction, and are exploring areas of life like the goth subculture. That's why I go out of my way to publish books, is to reach readers, and I want to profit for that work. And that's one of the reasons why I want to reach readers on online marketplaces like Amazon and Barnes & Noble and the iBookstore and Smashwords. And your Richard C. Meyer, he wanted to reach those marketplaces, and Mark Waid prevented him from reaching one of the bigger marketplaces, which is the comic book store. And that's something that you just can't do in these United States, is prevent someone from reaching the marketplace. I'm hoping Richard C. Meyer presents a strong argument, because he has a very strong case against Mark Waid, and I'm hoping when he wins this case, it sets a legal precedent, which sets a boundary for everyone to understand where the line of demarcation is and what the rules for engaging in. Because as it relates to many of these SJW comic pros, they seem to have a problem with boundaries, they seem to have a problem with social rules, and they seem to have a hard time understanding that if you don't like someone, you cannot prevent them from being able to do what they are trying to do in a business marketplace. No, if you don't like Richard C. Meyer's views, then your only option is to just not buy his comic. You cannot prevent him from being able to distribute his comic. You cannot go out here and prevent him from being able to make a contractual deal with a publisher to get his comic published and distributed. You cannot interfere in those ways in the United States marketplace or even foreign marketplaces, and you have to respect the rules of business, because those same rules of business that your Mark Waid is trying to destroy to censor Richard C. Meyer can also be used to censor Mark Waid. And this is something your Mark Waid doesn't understand, and I thought he would understand, because as the guy who wrote one of my favorite Flash stories, The Return of Barry Allen, it's one of the things that really saddens me about Mark Waid, is that he doesn't represent the heroic standards he promoted in The Return of Barry Allen as related to Wally West. Now, Wally West in Return of Barry Allen had to learn how to overcome his hero worship of Barry Allen and be a hero in his own right. But it's sad that your Mark Waid doesn't understand how to be a hero in this comic book industry and represent many of the standards and principles he presented in that iconic run of Flash and Kingdom Come. Because as a writer myself who has read comics over the years, I try to represent the principles I present in my books like John Haynes and ISIS in the real world. And that's something that's really saddens me about Mark Waid, is that he would rather be a villain to our comic book industry rather than be a hero who goes out of his way to build bridges between himself and the comic book industry and fans like Richard C. Meyer who want to try to reach new audiences, because that's what I see Richard C. Meyer trying to do: build bridges, build relationships, and build a customer base in this comic book industry. And he's been succeeding at that. And I would think your Mark Waid would want to encourage that. But no, instead of him trying to encourage building bridges in our comic book industry, reaching new audiences, reaching new customers, and reaching a larger group of comic fans, he would rather burn down bridges, alienate people, and turn people away from an industry that is in desperate need of new customers and in desperate need of new blood. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct books, like the ISIS series, the Eaststeam series, The Temptation of John Haynes, the John Haynes series, and the Spinsterella trilogy, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, ISIS, Escape from Transylvania. The goddess next door and John Haynes must escape a horde of vampires on the hunt in this horror-filled ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS, Escape from Transylvania in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today.